All right, fact check this podcast, and I am back with Dag for part 2 of becoming your own grocery. And tonight we're going to focus on composting. Dag, go ahead and introduce yourself once more, and then we'll just kind of tear off with it.
What's up, guys? I'm a daggerist, a small farmer, working on being able to say a successful small farmer. One day we'll get there. From time to time podcaster, co-host Justin the morning show. I don't know, man. Do a lot of things, but definitely my goal and passion is the farm and the homestead. So hopefully I can come and share some knowledge with you fine people.
All small farmers aspire to one day be successful at it. My dad has been doing. My dad's been doing it for 50 years, and he still aspires to one day be successful at it. So
yeah, it is. Well, it's the kind of thing like you're supposed to present yourself as what you want to be, right? Like if somebody says, "What do you do?" Like, okay, I work on, I'm a 12-volt tech and blah blah blah. And that feels instinctual to say, like, oh, I do that, but I need to start being better about saying I'm a farmer. Damn it. But it feels kind of guilty when it's like, oh, I don't quite, make a living off of it yet, but it's always a long process, something that can never be completed. I think that's what draws me to it, to be honest, is that I get bored of things. So this is something that I can live to be 200 and I could never finish my farm, it can always be better. So
somebody asked my dad one time, they're like, what would you do if you won the lottery? And he said, just keep farming until I go broke. It's like, what else am I going to do? That's what I'm going to do anyway. So I'm going to continue.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if you like a tinker and, just do stuff, man, it's just a great platform for it because there's always different stuff to be done. It's, as far as taxes go, it's a pretty nice thing to have going on because pretty much anything you do for your home, you can write off as a business expense. So, it works out. So yeah, we're gonna do composting today, and I think that this is a good second episode because if you're gonna do any sort of gardening or anything, it's kind of a must, and it's something that's kind of basic, but we can also make it a little more complex. So I think it's a good topic here. Do you want me to just jump into it, or do you have any?
I was going to kind of set it up. Like you said, it's a good second topic, especially for mid to late February, because depending on what part of the country you live in, we're coming up on that time of year where if you have a garden or if you're thinking about doing a garden, you need to be thinking about prep. You need to be thinking about the groundwork that you're going to do. You need to be thinking about, what you're going to put out to kind of supplement, do some soil sampling, possibly if you really want to get into it. A lot of times, like, I've been around gardening and stuff my entire life. And a lot of times whenever I plant something and I see the way things grow this year, I know what my soil is deficient in and what it has plenty of. And so I know what I need to do for supplementing and composting and stuff for the next year to make up for that. If you don't have 35 years of spending your entire summers on your hands and knees in a garden, you might not be quite as familiar with that kind of stuff. So you might want to have some soil sampling done and stuff like that. But, this is the time of year that it's time to start getting your game plan ready for what you're going to put out in your garden and getting your prep and getting prepared for what you're going to do to prep it for when you put stuff out, and having a composting plan and having stuff ready to mix into the soil as you're doing your prep is of vital importance. Now, something that we'll talk about later on is, there's also winter prep that you should have done back in the fall after last year's garden wrapped up to get things ready to make your prep easier going into this year. But, not everybody has been doing this for literally forever, and it may be your first year. And if it is, that's fine. There are plenty of things that you can do to get a start right now. And so that's why I thought this was a good time to do this episode as well.
Fair. Agreed.
You're further south, so you've had more of the
we compost all year, Betty.
Yeah,
and it happens fast. We can get compost like 6 months a year, depending on what you're composting. It happens quick here. So yeah, like I said, utmost importance. I mean, I guess just real quick, pros of there's not many cons, if any. but pros are going to be, you're getting free food for your garden. You're getting something to do with your kitchen scraps, and then some, your lawn waste. Ooh, that's actually, so as we go, I just like keep getting more and more notes, Um, so things like, like when I see people, trash day comes, and the once a month when people put out lawn waste or whatever, and there's perfectly bundled sticks and bags of leaves and stuff, and it just like kills me because like sending it to the landfill and you could be using that to make really good dirt. So that always hurts. So anyhow, you can cut down on waste and you can get really good food for your garden. And just I just hate waste, man. So I hate throwing stuff away. I hate throwing food away. It's one of the reasons I love having chickens. I can give it all to them, or in the compost or what have you. So anyhow, first off, I just want to say that let's say the way your grandparents composted, there was a pile and they might have gone out there and turned it with a pitchfork every so often, and they put stuff in it and put, cow manure and food scraps in it. And I just want to start off by saying that's kind of old fashioned. Like there's not much of a need to turn it. I'm very lazy. So any way that I can do it and do it lazily is better for me. I will say, as we already said, I have an advantage that I'm south, so it is a little bit easier for me. But one of the things when you turn the compost like that you need to be aware of is one of the reasons it speeds up the process, because that's what it does. It allows air in, it burns up some of the organic matter a little bit faster. It's some of the same downsides as like tilling. Yes, it provides a boost for the time being, but overall it generally depletes the soil. So that's why I recommend trying to steer away from that. There is something called a compost turner that I'll pull up here in a second that I do kind of like them though, despite me saying don't turn compost. But it's just a way to do it quickly and in a small space. So we're going to start off by talking about we're going to start with the smallest space and work out from there. So if you have an apartment or a balcony garden or a very small backyard or something, we'll start with that because that applies to everybody. But a little bit before we get into that, let's just talk about a couple sort of like rules for compost, I guess. What you're basically doing is you're taking, this waste, and it's obvious, I shouldn't explain it, but you're breaking it down to a state that the plants can use. So that just takes time. You're basically just making good dirt. Good compost, you can just plant plants in good compost. So you don't have to mix it with soil. It is just good soil, So the big key is not having it stinky and smelly. That means you're doing something wrong. You're looking for something that's aerobic, not anaerobic. I believe I have that correct, where you don't want a wet, soupy, sloppy, gross mixture. You want something that smells like good dirt. It smells like the gardening section at, the Home Depot or whatever. What good dirt looks and smells like. That's the goal. So the big thing is when you're making it, you need to watch your carbon to wet stuff ratio. We call it green to brown. So you want like 3 times as much brown as you do green. And that's just basically dry stuff, the brown that is. That's going to be like oak leaves and pine needles and hay and cardboard or whatever. That's going to soak up that moisture. You need the carbon in there to sort of, forgive me, I'm not a chemist, but to do the chemical reaction that breaks down your nitrogen and your more quote unquote hot items. So like chicken poop, for instance, if you just put straight chicken poop on plants, you're probably going to burn them with nitrogen. But like in our chicken coop, for instance, and we'll get into using animals later, but in our chicken coop, for instance, we put a ton of hay and wood shavings and leaves in it. And we clean it out, but maybe once a year. The chickens get in and mix it up. And if it gets stinky, if I go in there one morning and go, oh, it smells like chicken poop in here, I just throw in more straw straight on top. Boom, it doesn't smell anymore. They're fine. It layers up and it does its thing. You get that ammonia smell when it's not correct. So mind your senses. If something doesn't smell right, go with that. Next, when you first start composting, or if you read anything that tells you how to compost, there's things they're going to tell you can and can't compost. And it's not necessarily true that you can't compost those things that they say you can't. The reason they say that, or I assume the reason they say that, is there is some safety concern. So especially when you're learning, you don't want to compost things like meat or like dairy or dog poop or, feces from animals that eat meat. That's something that you definitely can do all that. You just need to be a little more careful with it. So we'll talk about that a little bit later too. But otherwise, things you can safely put in there. Again, most like lawn scraps, weeds from your garden, there's some things like if you have a really diseased tomato plant, maybe don't put it in your compost because you're going to want to put that on your plants later. Ideally, if the compost happens correctly, the internal temperature gets up to something ridiculous like 160 degrees, and it's supposed to burn all that stuff off. But again, why risk it? Just toss that in the fire pit or something. But again, kitchen scraps. If you have like bunnies or something, an herbivore animal, if you have cows or a cow pasture nearby, something like that, you can put manure from them in there, no problem, and that does really well.
One of the things with bunnies, with rabbits, is rabbit poop has a very high uric acid content. So if you're just using, you've got to really dilute it, and you may even have to mix in just a little bit of lime to knock that really high acid content down, or it will burn your plants real quick.
So layer it in with that carbon.
Yeah, with certain animals, you've got to watch out and do a little bit of research. That we learned that the hard way with the rabbit poop. My wife tried to kill an apple tree. She just kept dumping it on there, and I was like, "Dear, you've got to dilute that. Like you are literally killing my tree." Like, I know you think that it's just good, fertilizer, but it's not. That stuff has to be diluted. It's got to be broken down. Oh, like that can't just be straight added. Not like
turn it into fertilizer.
Right.
Exactly. With manure, you turn it into. It's not just straight fertilizer. Now, and there's charts. So please, by all means, do like your research on this. We don't have time on the show, obviously, but like different animals have different contents of carbon. So like cow manure is ultimately like the perfect amount. It's like 15% like poop and the rest of it's grass. So it's like the perfect like compostable like a ratio basically. But some stuff like pig or goat, you might have to adjust. So be aware for sure. And yeah, you can look that information up. But this is one of the reasons that we don't typically just put manure on the plants. You put it in your compost, let the compost turn it into something good. Let the microbes break it all down. I mean, there's just, what is it, like a teaspoon of soil, like, I don't know, an insane amount of biological life, like, stretched to the moon and back or something, some crazy statistic like that. There's just so much stuff in there. And so you really got to let it do its work, and then one other thing that's really good to add to compost, we'll have to do an episode about it in the future, but is biochar. So if you ever get to making biochar, a good way to condition your biochar is put it in the compost, and it makes really great compost. I haven't made biochar yet. I've been learning about it. I've dug a kiln. I want to try making some, but it's supposed to be really cool. But that's for another day. So I can share on here, right?
Yeah.
So I've got a couple items here, and these, I'm not saying you should go get these. I just found out that these kind of existed before the show, and I didn't even look into them until right before we went on because I wanted to be fresh with these. I didn't want to look it up, and I was generally curious. I expected them to be very expensive, but they make these devices, and I saw ads for them coming up on Instagram. So somehow they knew, yes, biochar holds 7 times its weight in water. It is crazy. Each like a piece, again, a tiny piece has like the square footage of like a football stadium, like a piece the size of a pea, like of nooks and crannies. It's fucking crazy. But there's these two devices. One of them's called a Lumi, and one of them's called a Lomi. I'm sorry. One of them's called a Mill. And so this is a machine, and I think it's neat, but I knew it was going to be way expensive. This machine, this one costs $399. The other one's like $900. And they have things where like you can rent them or lease them or whatever. Anyhow, basically it sits on your counter, and you put all your stuff in it. Your table scraps, even bones and meat products, and it like heats it and stirs it, and in like a day or two turns it into dirt, like, usable compost dirt. I think it's really neat. I can't imagine what kind of bougie lifestyle you live where $400 is worth it for that, but it's kind of cool, I guess. So there's a lot of options for very small spaces, I guess is what I'm getting at.
I have an old coffee pot or a coffee can, and I just put all the stuff in there and then take it outside and shake it every once in a while before I.
Yes, that tends to be the more traditional route. This one is you can rent it annually for $400 a year. This one's the Mill. So similar thing. Put your scraps in there and it makes dirt for you. So, neat, but probably a little That's probably on the really bougie side of things.
But then if you're like trying to do a apartment or, you know, a balcony garden, that's probably going to be more practical for your space and your use. So
it might be one of your only options, to be honest. You know, there's some smaller things you can do, but it really might be, you know. And again, it's cool, you know. I mean, it is kind of fucking neat, you know. I'll give it that. So something else that is kind of popular. So we'll take a step up to more realistic territory. If you have a small garden, and I know I said I'm not a huge fan of turning compost, but I do kind of like these things. Have you ever seen one of these, a little compost tumbler thing?
yes, yeah.
It's got the two bins, and
we had a neighbor that had one, and they're pretty handy.
Yeah, and I mean, there's little less than $90. This one here, I know people who have them. They I think I actually helped my stepmom assemble one. Anyhow, but yeah, I mean, they work. They make compost a little bit quicker. If you have a small area, patio, small garden, it might be a good way to do it. Get some good turnaround time, and not take up a lot of space or draw a lot of vermin or anything. Not that a good compost pile should, but you know, one less thing to worry about. So that's another kind of like basic thing. So I wanted to touch on that because I do kind of like those.
Yes, very cool.
And then let's see. Okay, so then the more traditional way would be what we call a compost pile, right? And you know, you have some sort of pile, and let's say you make the walls out of something cheap, like a couple of pallets, you know, 3 or 4 pallets, you know, squared up, fill it up. If you put in something gross, you know, let's say you know, your coffee can full of onion trimmings and this and that, and maybe some eggshells or whatever, and you know, you throw it in there, you toss in a handful of hay or leaves on top of it, makes it not smell anymore, keeps vermin out of it, maybe gives a good place for black soldier flies to lay eggs, and start doing some composting in there. So that's you just stack it up until it's full, and then right on it when you capped it off, and depending on your climate, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever, come on back and empty it out. A couple improvements that you can make to that basic design: you can make sure that it gets moisture. You don't want it sopping wet, but maybe whenever you water your garden, you spray the hose in there a little bit. Maybe you put a drip emitter in there. I don't know. It drips a little bit of water, but a little, keep it moist. Don't let it dry out completely to keep the biological activity going. And you know, that's it. It's pretty basic and works. You end up, you know, building 3 of them, and then once, you know, the last one's full, you start emptying the, you know, the first one, or you know, whatever the timing works out to. Another thing I actually really like for people with small area, and I helped a friend build one of these years back, but get like 3 plastic trash cans, you know, like 30-gallon trash cans, drill a bunch of holes in them all over, and use that as a bin, you know, fill it up, and then put the lid on and start with the second one. And you know, that's a great way to work. It doesn't make a mess. You can do it on a patio, you know.
And then it's something easy that you can take you know, you can take your coffee can that you're keeping all your shit in the house in, just go out, open it up, dump it in there, close it back up, and you might open it up and stir it around with a stick every once in a while, but you really, you know, you don't have to do that very frequently, especially if you've got some holes in it where that it's not staying real
with that airflow.
Soupy. And yeah, if it's got a good airflow, you don't have
to.
Yeah.
And then if it smells bad, put more carbon on it. Just put more carbon on it. The smell will stop, and it'll fix the problem. But that just means you don't have enough carbon. So a compost pile shouldn't be smelly. It shouldn't have a ton of flies around it or anything like that. If anything like that's happening, you need more dry leaves, you need more hay, whatever. And a great source of carbon.
Grass clippings are good. Like
fresh grass clippings are green, so if they're not dry yet, do be aware. Right. But again, add in the leaves. But if they're dry, then yeah, it's awesome. And, you know,
yeah, I'd say like what I'll usually do is like with grass clippings, mow the grass, especially if it's, you know, during the warmer months where it's nice and hot. Let the grass clippings kind of sit for a couple days and let the sun dry them out, and then just go back through with a rake and a wheelbarrow and rake it all up and throw it in.
Yeah.
I do that with the chicken coop. Like that's my organic matter for the chicken coop, for the chicken shit. Just keep throw in a wheelbarrow load about once a week to keep that nice, and it gives them a nice place to lay. It's a little softer than the hay that we get around here. or the straw and stuff that we have around here. So it's,
same. We just got a big roll, and I put some in my chicken coop today, and I was like, "I'm sorry, guys.
I know.
This is rough."
Yeah, like as soon as it gets back to cutting the grass time, then I'll scoop all of this shit out, and we'll put down a new fresh layer and get you all set up and ready to go. But for now, you just got to endure the bullshit.
So one of my favorite things to do is, for us, it's kind of a year-round thing, but for a lot of the country, it might be very specifically like autumn. Is riding around in the truck and looking for the 37 bags of leaves sitting by the curb that one of my neighbors or somebody nearby is throwing away. And I just pull up and chuck them in the bed of the truck and come back home, and they're easy to carry. I didn't have to shovel them. You can carry them right. You can pile them up next to your compost pile and use them when you need them, so keep an eye out, because accumulating carbon can then be a challenge too. If you don't have a big yard or something, like, where do I get enough carbon if I want to make a lot of compost? If I have a lot of chickens, that's a challenge. We have a lot of chickens, and that's a challenge. I hate going and buying pine shavings. Like, that seems silly if I can avoid it. So I still do, but and trying to find free carbon is good. Our local landfill, if I take a load of trash or something there, a lot of times they have a big pile of mulch out front that you can just take. Like, you got to pitchfork it into your truck yourself, but they get it from their lawn clippings. They shred them, and you can use that for carbon too. So just, you never know where you can get it. You can call around, you can talk to lawn services. There used to be a service, I don't know if it still exists, called Chip Drop, where you can link up. It's like an app that helps arborists link up with people who want wood chips. And, they have a lot of wood chips or branches or leaves to get rid of. Then you can set it up, and they'll just come drop it off, sometimes for free. Throw them $20, throw them a case of water, whatever. You can figure out ways to get carbon. So, get creative there for sure. What I'm currently doing for compost, I'm doing there's a name for this, and I don't know what it is. Our buddy Jay might actually know, because I think he does similar, if not the exact same thing. But it seems like a little bit of an upgrade. So basically, the walls of my compost pile it's like fencing, and then it's a ground cover, like gardening weed barrier fabric. I put along the walls so it's breathable instead of being something solid. Putting material in it, and then I have 3 2-inch pieces of PVC pipe with a bunch of holes drilled in it, going vertically, into it. So as I fill a pile, it allows air in, and I can just stick the hose in there and really, like, shoot some water down in there if I want to, but it allows a lot of aeration. So it's supposed to be a way that's supposed to make compost very quickly. So yeah, I think that is what it's called. Yeah. It's funny because it was something that I just sort of was like toying around with in my head, and then I heard somebody describe it and give it a name, and I'm like, oh, cool. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and say it's a good idea. Other people are doing it.
For those who do the audio only version of this, it's a Johnson-Su bioreactor is the technical name for it. You can look that up. You can Google it. It's pretty easy to find.
Yeah. So I'm doing my first one of those, and so far, I like it, but it just, even without doing it, it just makes the most sense to me from the composting I've done. You get that airflow, you get that water, and then just depending on what you're putting in it. And I'm putting in mostly like chicken bedding and stuff, because I get so much of that because of my chicken operation and baby chicks and blah, blah, blah. So I'm putting in it mostly chicken bedding. So it'll really break that down nicely. And I'm hoping to have, very usable compost 6 months after I cap it. And then, just build another one right next to it when this one gets full, and alternate them or what have you. So that's kind of my personal favorite at the moment. So if you have the space and the means, and I just built it out of trash. it was all stuff I had laying around, definitely don't go spending a lot of money.
That's the handy thing about composting is you don't need to be spending a bunch of money putting this kind of shit together. And that actually ties in well to the next episode of my show that I'm going to be doing. We're doing the Ways of the World with Don the Pleb, where we're going to be talking about like do-it-yourself projects that Pinterest has absolutely fucking ruined society, and people see all this like do-it-yourself bullshit, and then they want to go do it when in reality it would be way more cost effective to not do all of that dumb bullshit. So and like Jay Forte says in the comments, like, it's so easy, it just takes time. Like, a lot of this stuff that we're talking about with the composting, it doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be like elaborate or over the top. It's very basic. It's very simple. You can probably do most of it with shit that you've already got laying around in your garage or in a shed somewhere, or in your basement or where the fuck ever. Or you've got neighbors that have junk shit sitting around that you could use most of that stuff to do this stuff. You don't have to spend a whole lot of money on it, and it's not hard. It's just going to take time. You got to be patient with it, and you've got to be committed to doing it and doing it regularly. But yeah, there's nothing super difficult about any of this, and the benefit that you get from just doing it is immense. Like it can't be. If you've ever put a garden in 2 or 3 years in a row without doing much composting or without doing a whole lot of dirt work and kind of doing real good garden prep, you start to really notice it. I mean, there's a reason that big commercial farmers do crop rotations and do all of this, add all of this stuff to their soil, because if you aren't doing anything, you're going to deplete your soil and you're not going to be able to grow good. So we want to avoid that, and we want to be able to have we want to have good plants, plant health year in and year out.
Yeah, and your soil health is the key to your overall plant health and disease resistance and pest resistance, even. So good soil health is just so important, and it can take a long time to build, for sure. So something else that's good to have in your garden, but you can use to help you compost is worms. Earthworms. It's called a vermiculture. Or vermicompost. Vermicomposting would be composting with worms. Vermiculture would be the art of raising worms, but they can go hand in hand. So behind me in this very room, actually, my wife has a worm bin that it's just 2 Rubbermaid totes, one nestled inside the other, basically. And she puts a ton of kitchen scraps and some carbon and stuff in there. And she's had it for probably a couple years now. Started off by buying 1,000 worms off, I think, jimswormfarm.com or whatever. They sent them in the mail, just saying everything, which is crazy. But they do a great job of composting a ton of kitchen scraps. They make a lot of worm poop, which is just a phenomenal fertilizer. You can put it right in the garden as is. And then just today, I took a few palmfuls of worms and worm muck and put them out in the garden, because we actually don't have a lot of earthworms naturally here. I think because if you were to go like over in like the woods where there's actually like dirt, I think there's earthworms, but just where we're at it's been, especially our property in particular, it's been an orange grove for probably the last 100 years. So it's just the beach, dude. It's just like sand. So we're hoping to start a population of worms in the place we're actually starting to get dirt, black colored dirt. So I'm put some worms in the garden, but it gives you a breeding ground for worms that you can then transfer to your garden or what have you. I've seen people at the farmers market who sell worm compost. Like if you have a big worm, some people they just do big worm farming operations kind of for fun. They sell worms as fishing bait. You can sell, again, the compost at the farmers market or whatever. You can use it yourself. There are actually lots of things you can get out of that if you so choose, or you can just have a small worm bin, like most people, like most sane people, have a small worm bin for your kitchen scraps. But that's a phenomenal way to go. Just for that one just has a ton of benefits. I just love that.
Well, like for us here, this is cold country, and so our soil, like where you have the problem of a very sandy soil, we have the opposite problem. Ours is like that really heavy, thick clay, and so you really have to do a lot of work with it, and that's the next thing that I need to start doing with ours here on this property. I had done a lot of work in the garden sections that we used in our yard at our old house, and then we moved here, and so I'm starting all over again. And this is even more cold country than what that was. So the next step is I need to start adding in worms, and because the soil is so heavy and thick here that they don't move a whole lot, especially out in open areas that you could actually use for a garden. Like you said, like if I go out in the woods right back here and dig, it's a lot better. But if I'm out here like where we actually have the garden set up, it's just straight fucking clay and not a lot of activity in the ground. So
trying to build that up. The forest is just feet and feet and feet of natural compost. That's what you're going for. Out somewhere out in the open, it's just not necessarily the healthy soil. It's not that texture, the layering and the worms help with that because they dig tunnels. And it just works better in a garden because you have all your roots and everything that break it up for them. So in the vein of using animals to help with composting, probably one of the best things you can do is have chickens if you want to make a lot of compost, because not only does their poop, make great fertilizer once you compost it properly, they themselves do a ton of labor by scratching. So, like, again, like talk about like turning compost piles. If you have a pile of compost and you really want to turn it, just stick a fucking flock of chickens on it. They will turn it for you. One thing chickens can't stand is a pile of nothing. They will just tear down anything, man. So, if you have chickens, you can really use them to that advantage too. It was one of the reasons we got chickens originally was to do work for us. Let's say you have, I don't know, man. Let's just say a 10 by 10 pen. Okay. Fenced in, whatever. Throw all your compost stuff in there. Like, especially if you have like a big yard, you got a little yard waste, throw in there, make a pile. And then, once a week, send your chickens in there for a day, man. They're going to get in there. They're going to scratch around. They're going to turn it. They're going to poop. They're going to get tons of excellent food because they're going to eat all the bugs. It's full of bugs. So you're going to save money on feeding them. You're going to get good eggs. Your chickens are really going to love it. And they're going to, again, do that work for you. So using chickens, aside from just their bedding, can really be a good way to go. Goats, when we have goats, they make a lot of poop. If you rotate them right into different places, I'm not necessarily saying go out there with a shovel and collect it, but if you do have your goats in a small pen a lot of time and poop builds up, I mean, you got to do something with it. Don't just throw it over the fence, right? Like, put it in the compost, use it for sure. People in, I don't know, India, who have a lot of goats and not a lot of electricity, they use goat manure to make methane gas in oh man, what do they call this thing? It's like a biogas generator. You can build one or you can buy one. They're so cool. But they use like goat manure to actually generate methane, which they use to power light bulbs and cook food on a little stove and this and that. I didn't include the biogas in today's thing, but if you're so inclined, look into it. I think it's super cool. I went down an obsessive rabbit hole of it a few years ago and never actually got into building one. But you can actually make methane gas that you can use to, again, power stoves, and they make light bulbs that are powered by it, all sorts of stuff. It's really neat, and a lot of people in third world countries use that to get power. There is I think it's about $1,000. I think it's called home biogas, and it is a kit you can actually buy. That's the whole thing and does it for you if you don't want to build your own. Pretty neat. I don't personally know anybody who's used one, so I don't want to say how good they are. I've heard good things, but again, I haven't seen one personally. Okay, so because we are in the process of talking about animals and composting, I do want to talk about a couple food safety things. Again, look this stuff up, but be aware on both sides. Be aware of idiots who say you can just do whatever you want, don't have to worry about anything. And also be aware of people say you can never under any circumstances use, like manure and blah, blah, and in this way with, you can never use, meat scraps or whatever. Like, there's always a way, but you do want to be careful. Like, again, so the general rules are like using fresh manure on a garden. It's like 30 days if the food doesn't touch the ground between like when you can harvest the food between when you put the manure on, and it's like 90 days if it's like a carrot or something that directly touches the ground. So definitely be aware of food safety, but that's one of the reasons we compost our manure first, because if you compost it properly, you just don't have to worry about that. But like I will, for instance, on my non-food items, like some of my like trees and stuff, I'll take stuff like the mix of, it's not, just straight chicken poop. It's the mix of the chicken poop and the wood chips. And I'll just throw them at the base of a lot of my trees. And I've never had one burn. They get wicked green. They grow really fast for like 3 weeks. It's like a really boost of nitrogen. But there's a lot of that carbon there with it too. So, you sort of can do stuff like that. But, you got to be aware. And whenever it's food, it's better safe than sorry. I don't know. I don't want to tell people to do anything unsafe, but I also don't want to say be restricted by stupid rules either. Like, if you couldn't compost meat and poop and stuff like that, we would all be up to our necks in it. Like, nature takes care of it, right? Nature has a way to take care of it. Just use your head. If something doesn't smell right, go with that. That's my big thing, man. Use your nose. So something else I want to talk about, another composting method, and this again, shout out to Jay Forte for reminding us earlier today to talk about this, because I completely would have spaced it. It's something called hugelkultur, and I'm going to share. It's just a simple Wikipedia, but hugelkultur, so people call them hugel mounds. And basically you would take like wood or like logs or something, pile them on the ground, and then pile up smaller wood sticks, whatever, on top of it, and then dirt, and you have a big mound. Now, a lot of people, they like do this, and they sort of like they plant stuff in the mound, which I'm not saying you can't do or you shouldn't do, depending on what you're planting, but I don't really think that's the goal. It's supposed to be like a self-feeding thing that's supposed to feed for a while, but I don't really think that's the goal, and I don't necessarily think that was Mr. Hugel's intended goal. What this does, though, is you do that, especially if you plant plants in it, but after a couple of years, this mound turns into the biggest, nicest pile of beautiful compost you've ever seen. And then you can haul that away and put it onto your garden. So you can use it to plant in for some time. But I think the goal is to actually then have a huge mass of compost. So like, we had a hurricane a few years ago, and we had that chip drop company I was talking about earlier. We had somebody bring us, it was like 5 dump truck loads of oak wood from like a tree that had fallen, and they needed a place to get rid of it. And like, I didn't do this with it, but that would have been a great, I mean, it was, it's 150 foot long and 20 foot wide pile of wood. And like, that would have been the thing to do if I had like other dirt available, pile dirt on top of it and let it do its thing for a couple of years. And then I just, would have had like tons and tons and tons of great compost. But so if you do have a lot of material, heavy material, this is a good way to get rid of it. So go ahead.
I was going to say, that's one of those things that, like, where we live, we get a lot of storms in the spring and early part of the summer. And so you always end up with a ton of limbs down. There's just limbs down everywhere. And like the electric company comes through and cuts them up, and they just pile them up on the side of the road. And it's like, that was one of the things that I'd considered, was like getting a little wood chipper that I could just like take all that stuff and run it through. But this is an even more like cost effective and practical method. And it's more of a, like, we know that this is our homestead. Like, this is, where we're going to be. So I can pile all that stuff up, just dig a little hole or whatever, make a nice big pile with all that stuff, go around, collect it all, and then cover it up. And then, over in a couple of years, now I've just got this nice big compost pile that I can dig out of and add in and supplement my garden over time. So, and, you can do one every year, and then you've got, you've just got it continuing to go, because it's not like the storms are going to stop, or limbs are going to stop falling. We're going to have them every year. Yeah. So
they're going to keep growing. They're going to, they trim them even if there isn't a storm from time to time, and and if you dig in there, it's still a little woody, still a little carbony, then you just mix it in with your other compost material, use it as a carbon source. So I guess getting into the next thing, I have some compost stuff that I compost more than once. So we process chickens here, for meat. So we get a lot of yucky bits, right? Like offal, intestines, heads, feathers, stuff like that. Feathers actually make a great just compost material. You can even use them as like a bedding in your chicken coop. The other chickens will eat them. They're good protein, whatever. It doesn't matter. But you can actually use feathers for a lot of stuff. But we get a lot of yucky stuff that you don't want to just regularly compost. Let's say meat, let's say bones, all the stuff you're not supposed to compost, right? You can still compost that. You just maybe do it in a separate compost. And maybe if you normally do your, let compost sit for a year, let it sit for 2 or 3, and I've even had where I dig into one of these compost piles that I used for like chicken offal, and it's still wood chips. It's still wood shaving. So I'll use that material and compost it again. Use that in the next compost pile to cover up, my stuff with, to add carbon. So, you can, if you get into a compost pile and it's still woodier or chunkier than you want, compost it again. use it in your next batch. You don't got to overthink it too much. Oh, one thing I didn't think of to mention too is it might not hurt to build like a sifter. I used 1/2 inch hardware cloth and a couple, 4 pieces of 2x6 to make a rectangle, and hardware cloth in the bottom. So when you dig your compost out, put it in the sifter, shake it, and any big chunks of sticks, or in my case bones, will stay on top, and you can just throw them in the in the next compost pile or whatever. So having a sifter on hand, then again, you can build one simply, is definitely helpful. So finally, we're going to talk about really gross compost. All right. And this is something called humanure. Okay. So let's say let's say you're a hippie, or let's say you're living off the grid, or let's say you're still building your house and you don't have working plumbing yet, and you want a safe, for the most part, clean place to poop without running water. Doing something called humanure is actually a good way to go. When we were tiny house people and we had an outhouse, this is what we did. And basically, we had a porta potty. There's no porta potty. And in the bottom where there would normally be all the yucky stuff, we just put a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket, and we had a bin of wood shavings in there. And you do your thing, and you just cover it in wood shavings. And it doesn't have to be a lot of wood shavings. I mean, seriously, just enough to cover it. And like, you're not going to believe me, but like, it doesn't smell. Like, it's fine. Like, what makes the waste gross is when you add water to it, and it gets really gross, and that's where the diseases come from, and this and that. And I know that's like modern times. That's what we do, is we push a button and it just whoosh, the water just takes it away, and we're very used to that. But it's actually a really gross process. It's really not a clean or disease-free way to handle that shit. And you actually look up like people who die in septic tanks, like, because like the fumes are so bad. Like, there's been whole families, like one goes in to rescue the other one, and they just keep dying. You get in, you suffocate, you don't realize you can't breathe in there because it's all methane. Anyhow, water treatment facility, there's a lot of really gross shit that goes on in that, and it doesn't necessarily have to. I'm not suggesting you convert to a composting toilet like at your own home or anything unless you want to, but it is like an option. Or if you have like a camping shack or something and you don't feel like digging a hole, like, seriously guys, like, it's a really cool way to go. And then again, same thing like I said with the gross chicken stuff, just compost it extra long. If you feel bad about it, don't put it on your vegetables. That's fine. Put it on your decorative trees. The compost you make from it, you're not going to hurt anybody's feelings. But yeah, it works, guys. And it's one of the big things they say, don't compost human waste. And like, yeah, don't do that in your loamy or whatever on your kitchen counter. I probably wouldn't do that. Or like, your little compost pile on the patio or anything. But if you're doing an off-grid thing, it is totally possible to do that. And I just want to drive home with that point that you can compost all that stuff. I think David the Good has a book called Compost Absolutely Everything or something, and he tells you a lot of the in-depth ways to do it safely. There are some books out there by people who, will tell you how to do it. And, you can buy a $5,000 composting toilet or do humanure. It's probably about the same, end result.
Well, and like you said, like, keeping that stuff separate and composting it for longer, kind of paying attention to it, like, you can do it. You just have to do it right. And again, it goes back to what Jay Forte said earlier. It's easy. It just takes time. Like, you just have to do it the right way. And then you don't have anything to worry about. And like you were saying, like, if you don't want to put it, on your tomatoes or whatever, like when you're doing your prep work to get stuff, getting stuff tilled and getting your ground prepped for your garden, just till it in then. Like, use it as an additive, not as a topper or whatever. Like, you can work it into the soil, and then it all just kind of becomes one, and you're not having to like worry about it.
Yeah. And then I guess one other thing is trench composting, in place composting, lasagna gardening. If anybody knows that term, that's basically just composting in place. You put a layer of this, a layer of that, a layer of this, and then some cardboard on top, and then some dirt, and you plant. And it's just gonna compost. If your soil's really poor, dig a big hole. Like, you're gonna plant a plant there, dig a 1 foot across by 2 foot deep hole, and just put a bunch of crap in there, man. Put a bunch of weeds, put some wood chips, pee in there, start a fire in one layer, put it out, put some dirt, put some, just put a bunch of stuff in there, plant your plant on top, and it'll compost in place. So that's something else you can do to sort of speed up the process if you're trying to plant now, and get rid of a bunch of stuff. And if your soil's that poor, that could be a good way to help build it quickly too.
Before we wrap up, you had mentioned the home biogas thing, and I found the website for it. So for those who are interested, it's www.homebiogas.com. This one that you can see on screen for those who are watching is like $800. So $829. So nothing super terrible. I mean, and from just from looking at it, giving it a quick once over, very practical, very easy to set up, easy to use. So there are ways to use that stuff and to take advantage of those types of things relatively easily. Don't require a whole lot of space or anything like that. So
yeah, I think the biogas thing is cool. It was when I was looking into a few years back, they didn't have a lot of stuff in the US for it. You'd have to buy like your stoves and stuff, and it's very similar like propane. It's like have you ever converted a stove from like natural gas to propane? It's like the same thing. It's just a little different size inlet. It's like that. It's just a little different size thing. It's just a gas. But yeah, man, it's one of those things that people in third world countries are kind of rocking, and it's kind of awesome. And nobody here has ever even fucking heard of it, and it's really cool.
You got anything else to add before we wrap up? I think we've covered everything. And again, I think we said it the first time. Like, if you have questions, by all means, reach out. Like, our handles are right here on the screen for those watching the video. It's at jcamp1521 and at DAGORIST Dagorist. Like, feel free to hit us up. Like, if we don't know the answer, we know where to find it and can point you in the right direction. Or if you got stuff to add to it that we missed, because we're going to build on this throughout the course of the year and talk about more stuff. So please, by all means, let us know if you got any ideas or stuff you want to hear about from these episodes as well.
Yes, please. That was it, man. We covered a lot in that, I think. If anybody wants any seeds, check out agoristacres.com. We got a little seed company going on over there. Free shipping on orders over like $20. Use code FCT for 10% off. Right. Yeah, that's right. And you're good to go. If there's anything on there that you don't see and you want, holler at me. I might be able to get it for you.
Awesome. Well, Dag, thanks again. This has been great for all those who are watching and listening. Hope you got something out of it. Again, like I said, we are here to help. If you got any questions, comments, concerns, hit us up. Let us know. Like I said, I grew up on a farm. I've been in a garden since I was big enough to pull weeds. My mom has a fun picture of me when I was like 5 or 6 years old, where I had gotten out in the garden when it was way too muddy and lost my boots. So my boots are standing in the middle of the garden, and then you just see footprints where I had to like climb my way out of the mud to get out. So I've been in the garden for as long as I can remember, and Dag's been doing this for a while too, and trying to successfully do it on his own. So
maybe one day,
one of these days, yeah. So again, like I said, feel free to hit us up if you got any questions or anything like that. And next time, I think we'll be talking more about getting your seeds and stuff ready, and I'd like to kind of talk about plant mixes as well. Some things don't grow well with other things, and some things complement each other well. So, in the spirit of getting your garden ready, we'll talk about some of the seeds and how to get stuff planned and prepared for where you're going to put the things that are in your garden.
Hell yeah!
All right. So we will see you next time. Thanks again, Dak.
Yes, sir.